us. Thank you all again for the opportunity to speak to y'all tonight. Tonight I wanted to do something that I've always wanted to try, and we're going to do a call to character sketch. I want to look at a particular character in the Bible and see what we can tell about that person. We'll look at what they did in their life, who they were, what they did, and what can we learn about that person. So we're not necessarily going to be looking at every particular lesson that person can teach us, but more overall. And this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list. As with this character, we can spend a whole lot of time talking about it. And we're particularly going to look tonight at the Apostle Paul. And he's considered one of the more famous of the apostles of the early church teachers. And there's a lot that we can learn from Paul. In looking at him, I actually found a lot of things relatable between him and I. So I'm going to mention a lot of scriptures. We're not going to go through and read all of them because some that could be quite time consuming. So I'll read some, but I'll just reference most. If you would like for me to give you the reference again afterwards, that you can look this up yourself and study Paul on your own time. I'm more than happy to give you the references, and you can look that up. So, Paul. And we know him as both Paul and Saul. And for the longest time, I thought that Jesus changed his name. God changed his name. And I want to say someone actually said that from the pulpit once. I don't remember for sure. But in actually looking at it, I realized that Paul and Saul were both his name. Saul is his Hebrew name, and Paul being his Roman name. So he was known as both the whole time. This depending on who was talking to him. And we know that he was from Tarsus. And you can find that in Acts 9, verse 11. And where Tarsus is, in modern day, what we know as Turkey. And Philippians 3, 1 through 7. And you see that if anyone had cause to boast in who he was, it was Paul. Paul had everything going for him for that time. But as he himself said, he is boasting in human terms. It was all what he accomplished, what he did, what he was known for, and he was not boasting in God. And he called himself a Hebrew of Hebrews. Which meant that as far as they were concerned, he was pretty on top. He had succeeded in every way that a Hebrew could. He was circumcised, he was part of the tribe of Benjamin, and he was a Pharisee, which we know were the leaders of the religious group. And I mentioned that he was circumcised and that he was from the tribe of Benjamin. Knowing your heritage to a Jew was great. If you could say, oh, I'm from this tribe and I can show my lineage all the way back, that meant a lot. And that meant that you were from a known family, and it elevated your stature in society. So he was very close with the law. He did exactly what he was supposed to. And he was a good Jew, a good Hebrew. And whenever Christianity started, and he became a persecutor of the church. And he became very well known for finding and attacking Christian groups. And he became very feared for this purpose. And he says that he was zealous in the pursuit of Christians. He was zealous in pursuing them, zealous in killing them. And as we would consider today, not a good dude. But under the law, under the Mosaical law, he was a righteous man. Right? He was one of the best of that time. And now let's go over to Acts 9, verses 1 through 19. And a story we've all read hundreds of times over the years. And Saul had been charged to go to Damascus and to find a group of Christians that were known to be there. He was given scrolls of introductions, scrolls of purpose. The leading Pharisees knew where he was going, and they wanted him to go there. And this was a charged mission, and Saul was the one to do it. And so he's going, he's got a group of soldiers with him, and he's going to Damascus. And while he's going, and he sees bright light, and it knocks him down, terrifies him, and he hears a voice. And this voice is asking him, why are you persecuting Christians? Why are you persecuting me? And he hears Jesus. And in that conversation, he realizes he had been doing wrong. And he realizes that he had been on the wrong path. And he is told to go into the city, and then he speaks with Ananias. Ananias helps him, gets him back to health, because he had spent days without eating or drinking. So, probably not in the best shape. But he spends that time and he's praying. And eventually he is restored back to health. He is baptized, and he becomes a Christian. But the Christians that are around him, the ones that he had just been trying to kill a few days ago, don't accept him. Right? And they're looking at him. You guys realize a few days ago he was trying to kill us. Are we just going to let him? Are we cool with this? No, they weren't. And he is driven out of multiple cities. And he goes into Damascus and tries to teach. They drive him out. He has to be lowered out of the wall. He goes to Jerusalem. Again, he is driven out. They don't believe him. And after he is restored to health, he ends up going to Arabia for a time. He goes to Arabia. The Bible says that he spends 14 years there. And during that time, he is it never specifically says, as far as I know, but because he does, I won't want to say that he did not seek the counsel of any person. And so it's assumed that Jesus taught to him while in Arabia, that he would receive the gospel from Jesus himself. And he is taught, and he goes back to Damascus, back to Jerusalem, trying to teach them. The 14 years is in Galatians 2, verse 1. And after that time, he goes back to Jerusalem, and finally, he presents himself before the other apostles. And he had not talked to them, he had no interaction with the other apostles before this one. He goes in there and presents the gospel that he had been taught, and they confirmed they're talking the same gospel. And the original apostles and Paul. And both of them are speaking the same message. And he did this to prove that his gospel was the same. That he was teaching the same thing as those who had gotten the gospel directly from Jesus while he was on earth. And he did this because there were a lot of people who were teaching false gospels. And who were teaching some things that were just a little bit off, and some things that were just blatant. No, that doesn't sound right at all. But there were people who were teaching these things, going around writing letters and doing the same thing that the apostles were doing, but they had the wrong gospel. And Paul was proving his is the same as the original apostles. His message comes from Christ. And he takes this, goes on multiple missionary trips, and all across across the world at that time, and he's speaking to the Gentiles. He would take multiple people with him, some as co-teachers, some that he was teaching himself. We can learn a lot about discipling people from Paul. And because he was regularly taking somebody with him, taking them under his wing, and teaching them as he traveled. And had multiple of these trips, and ended up in basically the center of the world at that time, which was Rome. And ended up there preaching the gospel before the Caesar, and before the man who was in charge of basically the entire world at that point. And I talked to him, taught him, and he was eventually killed there. But before that, while he was on his trips, and he was captured many times, beaten many times, and he was left for dead many times, and he was stoned, put in boiling vats at one point, I think. Just pretty much anything, every bad thing you could think of. Paul probably went through it at least once. And he was even bitten by poisonous vipers on an island. And so he had pretty much every bad thing at that time happen. But he kept preaching. He kept going to Rome, and where he was eventually killed. And so that is the basic story of Paul. And again, we could get into a whole lot more specific instances, all that. And if I have the opportunity, I would love to go into more specific about some of these instances and some of the stories of Paul. But let's get into some of his characteristics. Some things about Paul personally. And 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 10, it said that people who saw Paul, and this is a description from other people, Paul's letters are strong, and he was well he still spoke well in his letters, and he had authority, he had said good things in his letters. That Paul himself wasn't that much to look at, wasn't that much to listen to. He was not a strong speaker. And he didn't have the appearance of a leader. He didn't speak like a leader. And none of that. and he had none of the physical qualities that we would associate with a leader. Charisma was not well spoken. Basically, he was not the kind of person that you would expect to be a leader in the early church. And whenever we select a preacher nowadays, it's usually someone who is charismatic, well spoken. He has a presence whenever he speaks in front of you, and all that kind of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, believe me, there's nothing wrong with looking for those kind of things. If you have somebody who can barely speak, most people aren't going to listen to him. Just be honest. But Paul didn't have that. But he spoke with authority. He knew what he was talking about. He knew that he was speaking the truth from God himself. And we'll see more later. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. And Paul says that he had a thorn in the flesh. And it was given to him from God to help keep him in check. And Paul could be a little prideful at times. He knew that he was doing a lot of good. And as he would tend to do, he got a little prideful about it. And what was this thorn in the flesh? And some people have said that it's poor eyesight. And we know later on that Paul had other people write his letters for him. And some say that he had a stutter. And that he had a recurring temptation that plagued him throughout his life. Some said that he had a physical sickness and that he couldn't shake off. But there was something in his life, and that kept him grounded. And that kept his pride in check. Doesn't matter what that was necessarily, no. He had something, as do the rest of us. We all have a thorn in the flesh of some sort. Hopefully not literally, but we all have something. And that keeps us from being too proud in ourselves. And God's response to Paul regularly asking to have this thorn removed was, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power, for power is perfected in weakness." And the good that Paul did, the good that we do, it's not from us. It's not from our power. And any significant change that may come from what I say isn't me. Is it coming from me? And when Clay speaks, and the people coming forward asking for prayer, being baptized, all that kind of stuff, it's not because Clay is such a great preacher. Like he is a good preacher. That's not why people come forward. The discussion and the good that comes from Kevin's class, it's not Kevin. It's because God is speaking through him. And it's because God's authority is being shown through Kevin, through Clay, hopefully through me. And also says, "Most gladly, therefore, I would rather boast in my weakness, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me." And because the more weak we become, and the more less. That's not the part I'm going to say that. The less of ourselves that we are, and the weaker we become, the more that God is shown through us. The more that His words are spoken through us. The more His influence can be seen. So whenever we boast, it's not, oh, look what I did. Look how good, look how good of a lesson I'm presenting. No. God is the one that told us. God is the one that gives these great lessons. And we need to remember that. And that is something a lot of people forget. Okay? Now, Philippians chapter 3, verses 3 through 14. Everything that Paul did, he was all in. And he put everything that he had into what he did for God. And he was not lukewarm in his faith. Never. And even at the beginning, and he had just got himself knocked off his horse by a blast of light and heard a voice. And his response was to spend days fasting and prayer. And he had all these things happen to him. And his response was to turn back to God. And he was then killed multiple times, imprisoned multiple times. And all that stuff, and his response was to turn to God. And he challenges us to walk in those same steps. And I am not pointing anything towards anybody. Right? I can point the fingers all back at myself just as easily. Okay? This is not to step on toes. But Christians today, we're not like this most of the time. And most Christians today, and we're not zealous. We're not courageous going out for God. And a lot of us are afraid to go out. And a lot of us are afraid to go up to somebody and talk to them about Jesus. And a lot of us are afraid to put something out there for Christ. You guys have known me most of my life. I see some purposes, and thank you for that. I appreciate it. But you guys have seen how I've struggled with speaking. You guys have seen how I've gotten up here so nervous I can barely get a sentence together. And you guys have seen me struggle with my confidence in speaking, with standing up here. And I remember the first time I tried to lead singing in El Paso. I got up there and I froze. Whether I do better now or not, I don't know. But I froze the first time I got up there. And this was back in El Paso. And the regular song leader had to save me. He had to actually start the song, and then I relaxed. And there's a lot that has happened for the fact that I have multiple lessons now on YouTube. I've shared multiple lessons on Facebook. I'm recording this right now. And when I was in high school, that would have scared me to death. I would not have done it. I would have been too scared. And there was one, stand up in front of the congregation and speak. And two, to put this on the internet and to talk about God on the internet. And I would have been afraid of the comments. I would have been afraid of, why is this guy talking? You can barely get a sentence out. And I was afraid of that. And it kept me from doing it. And it kept me from ever speaking out. And I don't say that as oh, look how far I've come. No. And if it was me, I'd be in the back over there in the corner listening to Daniel speak. It was not me. Right? It's because God has worked with me. And God has worked in my life. And I've learned from Daniel, from Clay, from other preachers that I've listened to, and going to different camps and all that, learning how to do it. And I have spent a lot of time trying to learn how to do this. Right? Am I perfect yet? Oh, no. And I still have a lot to learn. And I think if we asked Paul that question, he would say that he had a lot to learn as well. And he was not there yet. Actually, I think at one point he did say it. I just forgot to put that out. Paul was not perfect. And he trusted in God. He gave God all the glory. And whether he was successful or whether he failed. And he knew that God was being glorified. And God chose Paul in the midst of his sin. And he was literally on the road to go kill more people when God stopped him. And said, no, we're not doing this anymore. And we're going to go this direction now. And thankfully, Paul listened. And even after that, and even after this miraculous conversion experience, was Paul perfect after that? No. And the Bible shows that he had to struggle with anger. He had to struggle with pride. And he was not perfect. But every day he strove to be closer to God. He strove to learn more about God, to get closer to him. And every day to be better. So we spent this time talking about Paul. And we've seen how he went from striving against God, not consciously, but still, he was striving against God, to a miraculous conversion, and he became one of the greatest preachers that we've had in the church. He was not eloquent. He was not anything special to look at. And he went from murdering Christians in the name of God and doing what he thought was right, but turned out to be wrong. And he was called from that life, and even though he did great things, he still struggled. And he struggled with many of the same things that we do now. And I know a lot of people in here struggle with anger or pride or many other things that Paul talks about. And yet God chose him and made him the figure that we know. And from Paul, one thing that we can learn, we can be called to any lifestyle. And God does not define us by our sin. And he sees us, and he thinks, oh, I see Kevin. I see the experiences that he's had, and I can see how I can use him. And I can see how I can use him to bring other people to me. I see Paula Savage, all the great things that she has done, all the experiences that she's had, how I can use her. Every one of us, he sees, and he's not looking at our sin. And the fact that we are living in Christ, that sin no longer exists. But he sees what we could be. And he calls us out of our old life into this new identity. And one of the things that I liked in looking at this, the Bible goes from calling him Saul in his previous life. And at the beginning, it's all Saul, 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 Saul. And then after his conversion, after he spends some time learning and growing, and it switches to Paul. And he calls him Paul the rest of the way. And as though it were two different people. And that's part of why I thought it was. It was a literal change of names. But it was like his identity changed. And it went from a persecutor of Christians to a teacher of Christians. So, as we go out, I challenge all of us, look at other people and don't look at them as their sin. Right? And if someone has wronged you, done something against you, you just don't like somebody, and don't look at them like that. Look at them as a child of God. And look at them with that identity. And because that's the identity that you have. And that is your identity. And if you're struggling and letting go of your past life, and that's something I've done plenty as well. And trying to let go of that previous life. Let go of my sins. And acknowledge God doesn't see that anymore. He doesn't see those sins. Just like Paul. Who I'm fairly confident in saying did things a whole lot worse than we've done. I don't think anybody in here has ever killed potentially hundreds of people or caused them to be killed. And so if God could use Paul, and there are plenty of other examples, and other people, liars, prostitutes, gamblers, and all sorts of people, and that the Bible talks about, of God pulling them from their old life and giving them a new identity, taking away their sins and making them a new person. And if all those stories exist in the Bible, who's to say that God can't do that with us? Who's to say that God's not waiting for you to turn around and go back to Him? And to turn around and say, I've messed up, please help me to change. And He'll do that. He will help you change. Is it going to be fun or easy? No. It is going to be one of the hardest things you've ever done. But I can guarantee you, anybody who has gone through that, anybody who has started that change process and done it with God, it's a completely different story from how it could be if you were doing it yourself. And He is with you the whole time. And He is with you. He brings other people to you and helps you to get through it. And so, again, I realize I'm pretty much speaking to the choir on this. You guys probably know 95% at least of what I've said tonight. But if there is anybody who is still hanging on to their Saul life, anybody is still hanging on to their past sins, past selves, don't leave without talking to somebody about it. And don't leave without talking to somebody or even just spending time in prayer, talking to God, acknowledging that that you've sinned, acknowledging that you were not living the way that God wanted you to. And start taking the steps to get past that. And I assume our baptistry is ready. there's at least water in a basin. If you need to be baptized, or something we never talk about, re-baptized, recommitment, and we can do that. And we can hurry everybody out if that's necessary, if you want to do it alone. And that's fine. Or even if you just need prayer. And you just need somebody to talk to and to talk through whatever it is that's going on. And there are a lot of great people in this building. They will talk to you. And I 100% get it if you don't want to talk to me. That's cool. But find something. Talk to them. And there's a really good chance that you're going to find somebody that's gone through the exact same sin that you have. And talk to them. Get back with God. And start putting on your Paul identity. And start going down that road. And I guarantee you, Jesus will be with you. God will be with you. And the people in here will be with you as well. So, if you have any questions or comments for me, I know I've already gone over. I'm sorry, I talk a lot. I'm sorry. But if you have any questions, any comments, please voice them. Talk to me, talk to any of the more experienced Christians here. But don't leave without getting those questions answered. Thank you.
Ronnie, in just a minute, would you do a closing prayer? Before our closing prayer, we